Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be talking about rogues, primarily with a brand new legendary revamp that's happening in patch 9.1. Potentially, your rogues could be thinking about joining the Night Fae. A lot of rogues right now are Necrolords, Kyrian, or Venthyr, and Night Fae since I think 9.1 has been falling behind by a little bit. The rogue covenants, at least for PvE side of the game, are very close, and maybe even closer within PvP. There's a variety of different valid choices, but for player versus player content in particular, this new legendary could potentially get you to roll Night Fae. I wanted to explore this legendary, show you guys my findings, as well as the burst potential behind being able to combine Adrenaline Rush, Vendetta, as well as Shadowblades, all as part of one big rogue burst. But before we explore this, majority of you guys watching the videos are not even subscribed. Just hit the sub, you watch the videos anyway, hit the bell, it helps out the channel. Anyway, let's get into the topic. So what is the legendary in question that might make Night Fae worth considering going forward? It is going to be the one revolving around the ability of Sepsis. This legendary has recently been changed on PTR, where it will now grant the rogue the main big buffs of the other specs when Sepsis expires. So on paper, as a Subtlety rogue, when you hit the enemy with Sepsis, and when the Sepsis falls off, you gain Vendetta on the enemy target that you hit with Sepsis, as well as a buff of Adrenaline Rush, since Subtlety rogues already come with their own personal buff of Shadowblades. For Assassination, since you already have Vendetta, you gain Shadowblades as well as Adrenaline Rush, and for Outlaw rogue, you gain Vendetta as well as Shadowblades. Alright, enough talking about it, let's actually test it. And I want to show you guys my footage to show you exactly the details of how this legendary currently works, the bugs, as well as the actual applications. So once you put Sepsis on the enemy target, as a Subtlety rogue, that target of Sepsis will have Vendetta applied to them. So if you're a spec that can benefit from Vendetta, it'll always select your primary target. You can just put it on one target and then switch to another. Second, does Vendetta actually increase the damage? And happy to report, because that's kind of a big buff that it applies for Subtlety as well as Outlaw. Yes, Vendetta actually does increase the damage, so good part that this portion of the legendary actually functions. Next, Shadowblades, does that actually work? For Outlaw rogue, it actually works pretty well. It generates that extra common point, which could be pretty massive, because Shadowblades on a spec that builds and spends common points as fast as Outlaw does has potential. Even though the burst you normally do as Outlaw, you don't necessarily need to spend common points, you could desync certain cooldowns in order to build up for a kidney shot, build up for a bunch of dispatches over and over. For Assassination, you gain Adrenaline Rush as well as Shadowblades. Adrenaline Rush does actually give you auto attack speed increase. And if you're currently playing the Deadly Poison build of Assassination for PvP, which is kind of like a new meme build, it does give you extra auto attack speed, which means more poison procs and applications on target, so that is damage increase, but Shadowblades is kind of finicky. Shadowblades doesn't actually generate your common points properly with Mutilate. I don't know what it is about the ability, but every other spell like Throw a Knife, for example, will generate your common points. Though Shadowblades does have a damage increase component working for it, so while finicky, it technically sort of works, and if they can fix that part on PTR, which I would imagine if that's the only part that's broken, then it could technically work in PvP. But there's no point of switching to a covenant that's especially not as popular unless it has some real damage behind it. So next thing we have to do is test it on some real players. Subtlety is by far the most exciting spec to test with this, because you're looking at a spec with so many different bursty bonus modifiers for your damage. You have Shadow Dance, which is a damage amp, together with Shadow Blades, which is damage amp for your common point building abilities, together with any on-use trinkets, together with Symbols of Death, which will make your first Shadow Strike 100% critical strike. And if you're playing Night Stalker, that's also extra damage amp on top of it all. So you have a lot of different layers of damage, and now you're including a Vendetta into it all. And all you need to do is make sure that Sepsis comes off as you're starting your burst in order to maximize the value of your Vendetta, which can be planned if you are allowing your Sepsis to fall off naturally. This damage is really scary, but of course you're gonna have some issues of what happens if Sepsis gets dispelled? What if a hunter uses Feign Death? Does your damage just disappear into the thin air? So me and my buddy AJ, we tried to see what happens when you dispel it. So him being a survival hunter, he can remove poisons easily. It applies Vendetta. Removing the poison early just procs it a little bit earlier. And while we didn't have any druids on hand, I imagine if you cleanse it, dispel it, or use the Kyrian Vial, you will also just have Vendetta proccing early. And of course, things like immunities like Bubble and Ice Block will completely remove Vendetta, and the enemy is immune anyway, so even if there's a debuff, there's no point of attacking them. But could a Beast Mastery Hunter, for example, use Feign Death to clear Vendetta as well as the debuff? We tried having him Feign Death with the legendary for Feign Death, Vendetta stays. We tried things like having him cleanse the debuff early and then pressing Feign Death in order to remove Vendetta, and Vendetta still stays. So while the enemy team might be able to proc the debuff early if the rogue can act fast enough, technically you could take advantage of it. Or if you have patience to set this up, you technically could just let the debuff time out and then use your burst as it's about to fall off. So logistically, it could potentially work. Let's take a look at the other specs. Outlaw, I know, not a popular PvP spec whatsoever. It still is my favorite. And can it work with the Vendetta? I mean, 20% damage increase on top of your hard-hitting abilities, and the damage is there. While Outlaw Rogue is in the burstiest class, it will be able to lock somebody down in a kidney shot and then burst them down while Vendetta as well as Shadowblades is rolling together with their active Adrenaline Rush. And as I said before, this damage does seem very comparable to the Venthyr Outlaw Burst, which is probably the best you're going to get right now. So in my opinion, as one of the few Outlaw Rogues that PvPs, I think it's actually pretty decent. And even though for Assassination this burst and legendary doesn't work properly together, it does have a bit of a punch, mostly from the actual auto attacks that you gain with the high mastery proc. I did have to move my soul binds around in order to not have to go back to the Heart of the Forest and forth, but if you are playing with Naya, I imagine that this burst could be pretty good, especially with the fact that you're just doing so much poison application with Adrenaline Rush rolling. Speaking about soul binds, do you have anything competitive right now for the Night Fade that could work in 9.1.5 or even currently? Grove Invigoration Mastery buff together with the burst damage that it provides could be that extra layer for sub-rogues and assassination rogues. The mastery provides is quite high because it works with your Covenant ability. Since that ability is a 1.5 minute CD, it gives you a lot of stacks of mastery. Together with the capstone trait, if you are playing with somebody of a different covenant, and that is not uncommon in Shadowlands as a variety of classes play a variety of different covenants, Bonded Hearts will also have a chance whenever you gain a stack of mastery, which can happen from your auto attacks and abilities, to increase your mastery by 50%. Imagine that extra layer of mastery burst during this big Vendetta window with all your cooldowns, and the mastery is buffed by 50%. You also do have Dreamweaver with Pot Tender, which is a nice chi death mechanic. It's sometimes difficult to line it up, but with a mage or like a disc priest, holy priest, to provide extra CC if you do fall in battle, it could be pretty decent. The capstone trait is deemed Delver, which is a nice damage buff, but I don't think it's super competitive. But Corian, on the other hand, is, with Wild Hunt Tactics allowing you 10% extra damage, with its capstone trait allowing you a little bit of execute towards the target. And with this kind of a burst, you're looking for big damage at the start and big damage to execute. Personally, I was impressed with just how well this legendary works, and it is going to be a bit finicky. It's definitely going to be a question of timing. Does the enemy team have a way to dispel this poison? If not, then you just have to wait until Sepsis is about to fall off before you start your burst. However, if the enemy knows you're using this legendary, they know that the biggest haymaker is coming and they know who your target is, so defenses can be used preemptively, which could ruin the surprise. And if the enemy team does have a poison dispel, of course they're going to dispel a Covenant ability on a 1.5 minute cooldown. I mean, it's basically the best trade in the world. But as a rogue, can you utilize that timing when the enemy presses Dispel in order to combine big damage afterwards? Because timing is going to be everything. But in my opinion, especially for sub-rogues, that Vendetta overlapping over your other buffs has a lot of potential. Definitely a Covenant that I'm now excited to check out once 9.1.5 comes out and the Covenant switching is finally available. That's probably the most exciting part, since now we can play around with these legendaries, and I think this one has potential. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think Nightfall Rogue could work? Do you think this Lego could become something? I wanted to check it out as soon as I could, and honestly, was pretty impressed. Thank you all. I'll see all of you in the next one.